Brewster here, new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Autograph, and I've had some requests to feature some of Autograph's music, and if you search around on my channel, you'll find a 3-for-all episode for Steve Lynch, where we looked at some of his licks and tapping ideas, and this is the first time we've looked at some of their chords and rhythm work. And Autograph formed in Pasadena, California in 1983, and the following summer they were on tour with a very popular band, and it was a huge, burst for their promotion and their name. And by 1985, they had a huge hit single under their belt, a popular music video on MTV, and they seemed destined to take over the world. So in the spring and summer of 1984, Autograph opened for Van Halen on Van Halen's historic 1984 tour. And can you imagine a better promotional tour for a new band? Touring with Van Halen on Van Halen's most popular tour. And it definitely introduced Van Halen fans and concert goers to Autograph and Autograph's music and style and sound, and definitely put Autograph on the map after that tour. So by the summer of 1985, Autograph had become literally rock stars. They completed a successful tour opening for Van Halen. They'd released their first album, Sign In Please, which was racing up the charts. They released their first single, Turn Up the Radio, which was racing up the charts and being played on radio and on MTV. And that song was also featured in an episode of Miami Vice, which in 1985, that was the most popular show on television. So definitely Autograph, had a huge splash in the middle of that decade. And then their music started to appear in other Hollywood films and television. So here's an image where some other places you can find Autograph's music in movies and on television too. And we've talked about Steve Lynch from Autograph before, but let's talk about the other Steve, Steve Plunkett. And actually post-Autograph, Steve Plunkett's been very successful behind the scenes, a producer, songwriter. He's written music that's appeared in TV and movies as well. So it's kind of a trend. I think actually the direction with Autograph's music, appearing in Hollywood film and on television, might have been Steve's doing, Steve Plunkett, that is. But here's an image with some places you can find Steve Plunkett's music, appearing in television and movies and things like that. So the music in this episode is going to come from 3 Autograph albums, and really that's kind of their heyday or glory days, because Autograph broke up somewhere around 1989, and the music in this episode is going to come from Sign In Please, That's the Stuff, and Loud and Clear, which are the 3 Autograph albums most people think of. I think they have released a few other albums after that, maybe like a decade later or something like that, but we're going to look at those classic Autograph albums and songs. So here we go. With the opening, that's the song Built for Speed from the album That's the Stuff, and it's something like this. Pummeling this A power chord. So it's an A power chord right there, and you're going to move up to this partial D over A. You could also think of that as like an A sus4, because you're playing A and D right there. And it's all against that A root note in the open A string. So D over A or an A sus4, that's up to you. And then you're going to change that to an A5 right there. Just add that E note like this. Go back to that partial, D over A or A sus4, however you want to think of that chord, and then you're doing a slide right there. This partial C to partial D back to that partial C, and then loop that riff like this. And then you hear the verse start right there. And there you just stand on that A power chord, hitting that open A, and then you do that slide at the end of the line of the verse. A, C, C sharp, D, shift to E, grab that G, and then it's a D sus4 to D major right there. Like that. And that's one thing you're going to notice in a lot of Autograph songs. They love the sus4 action, which they may have picked that up from Van Halen, but there's tons of bands and guitars out there that play, you know, sus chords. And there it is right there. Next up is the song Crazy World, and this is also from the album That's the Stuff, and it's something like this. So we're basically starting with this B power chord, and then you distinctly hear like some pinch harmonics and palm muting with this little single note idea. Something like that. So a B power chord, and then you're going to grab this A to D, and you're going to kind of half squeal that D note. Something like that. And that E to F sharp, and then you're doing this. So that's B, D to C sharp, and then so that B, D to C sharp, then to A, and then F sharp to E. It's all palm muted, like that. So that first pass, and then do it again. And then an A power chord. A power chord to another A power chord up here, and then a G over A, and you're going to basically move this D to a C sharp, and that's an implied A7 right there, like this. And then back to that B riff. Next up is She Never Looked That Good For Me from the Loud and Clear album, and it's something like this. So you're basically spelling out chords in the beginning. It's a D5, and then right there it's basically an F over A, and then a B flat 5, and then spell out a C5 right there, a 3-note C5. So it's a 3-note D5, just a 2-note F over A, 2-note B flat 5, and then a 3-note C5, like this. There's actually two guitars playing that. One's just playing it straight. Another one's kind of squealing like that high D and that F note right there. And then eventually you hear, moves to that B flat and just stays there. And then when the verse starts, you're doing this. Think of that first chord like a B flat over C. You could also think of that as a C7 sus4 right there. Because you're playing, C, F, and that B flat, but you're separating it, like this. And then it's a C sus4 right here to C major right there. So it's really interesting the way that chord progression kind of unfolds. You're basically playing, 3 implied chords there, but you don't have to move your hand. You have to move your fingers, but it's all in the same, neighborhood right there. Really cool stuff. Next Next up is the song Friday from the album Sign In Please, and this riff has all these little partial chords and fragments of chords moving around. Really interesting. Something like this. A lot of different ways, since it's just little partial chords and fragments of chords. You could think of that first chord as part of a G5, or you could also think of it as part of a D sus4 right there. But right there, you could think of it like a D sus4 to D major, and then D major to D sus2. Grab that E note, and you're going to go back to that sus4. Grab that G. So the first half is this. That part, move down to C and C sus2 right here. And you can move up here to a partial E minor to D major right there. And then you loop that whole thing again. Next up is the song All I'm Gonna Take, which is also from the album Sign In Please, and this is two guitars during this guitar part. And the first guitar is actually doing this. Something like that. It's just this little single note kind of palm muted motif, and it's the open B to this F sharp, open B to this E, open B to that B note, and then the open B to a fretted E to F, like this. And you're going to basically add vibrato on that F sharp, and then you want to loop all that again really slowly. Guitar playing chords, which I think that's actually Steve Lynch, and then the chords is probably being performed by Steve Plunkett. And together, I'm going to loop that with a TC Electronic Ditto looper, but the chords and that guitar part sound like this. That's supplying this melodic, idea, and then the chords, that's really just a B11. And that high E string is your 11 or 4th. So it's the fretted, B, F sharp B, open high E right there. B11. And then you're going to move over to this G power chord, but then also play the open G, open B, and open high E, and that's a G6. And it sounds like he's kind of reverse strumming those chords. Kind of raking this pick along the strings like that, and together it has that really cool kind of melodic sound. What a great intro. I mean, it definitely gives you the feeling that it's going somewhere, which that's the epitome of what an intro should do. I mean, it's opening the song and moving you right into that verse. Last but not least is the verse riff from the very famous Turn Up the Radio from Sign In Please. And this is kind of elusive because it's the keyboard and the guitar doing the same thing, and then a second guitar is just kind of pumping out that octave riff. But you prominently hear this. synth or keyboard and guitar doing. So the first part, that's really just a glorified G octave, the low G, this octave of G, and the open G, like that. And I've actually seen this transcribed a lot with a C right there, like a C5 over G. And you can hear that, but it doesn't really sound right to me. It sounds more like just kind of a G octave instead of that C over G. Definitely has a very transparent sound as far as that second chord. And then as far as the synth and guitar part together, it's really just some slash chords. So it's a G. So it's G, and then it's a C over G, and you're just keeping that G root note. Now that's actually two guitars, but you can actually fret that G note with your thumb, and then, you know, kind of churn out this chord progression all by yourself, like that. That C over G, then it scoots back to an F over G right there, and that's kind of tricky if you're not used to doing that, because you don't want your thumb to move if you're fretting it like that, but you're going to keep the triad, you know, back here, but keep that thumb where it is for F over G, and then back to that G like this. And you hear that little D to G, C to F, and then B to the open D. And you might be wondering, like, well, why would I want to play it like that, you know, when it's actually two guitars and a keyboard in there? But let's say you're the only guitarist in the cover band and they want to play this song, and maybe you don't even have a keyboard player. Well, what are you going to do? You could do it like that, and you could cover all those bases with one guitar. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Autograph. And like I mentioned earlier, Autograph broke up in 1989, and then they've reformed and done some kind of reunion, you know, gigs and appearances and stuff like that. But not like they did back in the 80s. I mean, they were definitely, you know, full on, full force, you know, in the mid-80s till about the end of the decade. And then they all just kind of, you know, dispersed and kind of went their own ways. And it's interesting to note that Steve Plunkett has remained very busy behind the scenes, and while he may not be like up front, like a front man in a band, he's definitely logged a lot of session hours and lots of impressive studio work and stuff too. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.